Luigi Mangione, the man accused of shooting and killing UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson, doesn't want to go back to the scene of the crime. In fact, he doesn't want to go back to New York State at all and has contested his extradition from Pennsylvania. We're taking a closer look at Mangione's case, why his defense is fighting extradition, and what that means for the future of his legal proceedings. Now, this case begins on December 4th when 50-year-old Brian Thompson was shot and killed outside the New York Hilton Midtown. Thompson, who was the CEO of UnitedHealthcare, was in Manhattan for an investors meeting. But in the early morning hours last Wednesday, Thompson was gunned down in broad daylight right outside the hotel. Bullet casings were later found on the scene, scrawled with words like deny and delay. It quickly became evident that the suspect likely had some issues with UnitedHealthcare. That's when the nationwide manhunt began for the suspected killer, who prosecutors now say is Luigi Mangione. So from the start, we only had a few surveillance camera photos of Mangione, but they were all over TV and social media. So much so that a person in Altoona, Pennsylvania recognized Mangione when he stopped for a quick breakfast at the local McDonald's. Police were called and Mangione was found with things like a fake ID, a Faraday bag, 3D or ghost gun, a laptop, some medical masks, and a notebook with a manifesto. Reports say things written inside that notebook align with Mangione's distaste for the healthcare system, after suffering with major back issues that caused chronic pain following a spinal surgery. Inside the notebook were written things like, quote, "What do? You whack the CEO at the annual parasitic bean counter convention. It's targeted, precise, and doesn't risk innocence." So quickly, he's taken into custody at that McDonald's on charges of forgery, tampering with records, possessing instruments of a crime, and false identification to law enforcement. But those are just the charges in Pennsylvania. In New York, he's charged with second-degree murder, 3 counts of criminal possession of a weapon, and 1 count of possession of a forged instrument. Those may be the more severe charges, but before Mangione could head to New York, he had to appear in court in Pennsylvania. That's what happened on Tuesday. You may have seen the outburst video of Mangione outside the Blair County Courthouse in Hollidaysburg, Pennsylvania. Inside the courtroom, though, the prosecution said they were cooperating with New York State on the extradition and ready to move forward with that process. But in an unexpected turn of events, Mangione's defense, headed by attorney Thomas M. Dickey, contested that extradition. Okay, now this is a story everyone across the country, maybe even the world, is talking about. But we have to remember right now, a central location to this story is Altoona, Pennsylvania. And also in Pennsylvania, we've got criminal defense attorney Matt Mangino. Thank you for coming on with us today, Matt.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right, so this case is happening in Pennsylvania, and right away I'm starting to think about another high-profile case with an arrest in Pennsylvania. That's Brian Kohberger. Kind of just a coincidence there that they both were arrested in Pennsylvania. But in the case of Brian Kohberger, he appears in court, waives the right to extradition, and then he's headed to Idaho almost immediately in regards to that quadruple homicide that he is charged with. But here, in the case of Mangione, that's what I was expecting. Instead, in the courtroom, I hear that his defense is fighting extradition. Why do you think that may be?
Well, it's really unusual to fight extradition. I mean, it's inevitable that you're going to be extradited back to the state in which they're seeking the warrant. I mean, here he is charged in Pennsylvania with some offenses with regard to firearms and his IDs, forgery. But obviously, the main charge is this charge in Manhattan, where he's accused of murdering CEO Brian Thompson. New York is going to issue a warrant to have him return to New York. The DA in Blair County has already said that they're going to wait until the New York case is resolved to do anything with the charges they have there. So the only issue with regard to an extradition hearing is he the guy that they want in New York? And that's pretty much an obvious answer to that question. But you have a right to request that the local state that's holding you, proves in fact that you're the guy wanted in New York.
So Mangione's defense attorney says in regards to those charges in New York, he hasn't seen any evidence that connects his client with those charges. So he says, okay, they're completely separate. We're going to fight the extradition. Do you think that's a tactic by the defense attorney?
Well, if anything, it's a delay tactic. Extradition has been around as long as this country's been around. It's in the Constitution that you commit a crime, in one state and you flee to another state. That state where you committed the crime has the right to bring you back to try you for that crime. There are some situations where maybe extradition is a little more difficult. Sometimes when there's murders, serious crimes in both states, one state might want to try the case before the other, and there's a bit of a disagreement about how that is going to proceed. We in recent times with the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe v. Wade, we have heard some governors say, hey, we're not going to extradite people based on these abortion charges in another state. But Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro made it very clear. He's been vocal about this case and the reaction of the public with regard to this case. So there's no doubt that this case is ultimately going to return to New York to be tried.
So Mangione will end up in New York. We're just not sure when that will happen. So I want to talk about what was mentioned in the hearing, actually. There were a couple of stipulations after the judge denied bail. So right away, he says the defense has 14 days to file a writ of habeas corpus. So I'm in the gallery thinking, okay, what is that? Going back through my memory, I'm not an attorney. What does that mean? And I looked it up, and I know that it's in reference to whether a inmate can be held lawfully in the country or commonwealth, the state, whatever it is. Can you break it all down for me?
Yes, so obviously, habeas corpus is a Latin term, and it means free the body. Okay, and so what happens in a lot of criminal cases, a defendant will file a writ of habeas corpus suggesting that he's being falsely held, that he's not, in fact, the person who committed this crime, or that there was no crime committed, and that you can't be held until the prosecution, or unless the prosecution proves that they have probable cause to hold you. Okay, so it's a very old, long-standing procedure in the criminal justice system in which someone can contest being held. And that's really the only thing that you can do in terms of this extradition, that you're holding him illegally because he's not the guy who New York wants.
So the defense can file this motion, and after that, a hearing would then have to be set. Is that when the prosecution, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, would have to come forward and prove that he's their guy?
Well, right. This, whether it's habeas corpus, whether it's an extradition hearing, um, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is going to have to present evidence that Luigi Mangione is in fact the guy that's wanted in New York for the murder of Brian Thompson. That in fact there is evidence that a crime has been committed in New York, and that he is the person that they're seeking in terms of that crime.
One more stipulation that the judge put out during this hearing is that Pennsylvania has 30 days to receive a governor's warrant from New York. What does that mean? If that's brought down, does it mean, okay, everything else is thrown out, he's going straight to New York? What's all that about?
Well, that's how the process works in terms of extradition. So the state that wants him has to provide a an extradition warrant to the state where he is being held. And once that extradition warrant arrives, then these determinations are made. Is this the guy? Is Pennsylvania going to agree and turn him over? And so that warrant from New York, that extradition warrant, really starts this whole process moving.
And based on what the prosecution has been saying, they are ready to send him off to New York. They're very cooperative with all of that. Why may that be that Pennsylvania wants him out of the Commonwealth?
Well, there's a couple of different reasons. I mean, number one, this is a high profile case, and the media is following it very closely. So the media is in Altoona, the media is in Harrisburg. They want to see what's going on with this case. The sooner he leaves, the quicker those people leave as well, the media people. And so, the other issue is that because he's such a high profile defendant, um, security is enhanced. So as I understand it, again, just reading news reports, that he's being held in a state correctional facility. He's not being held in the Blair County Jail. Typically, someone, awaiting extradition would be sitting in the county jail waiting for extradition. But because this is a high profile case, and it's stirred so much um, sentiment in the community, and some of it extreme, frankly. I'm sure that Pennsylvania would like to get him back to New York so they don't have this responsibility for his security and other things.
I'm glad you brought that up, the institution where he's being held. I actually went there when I was in Altoona just kind of see what it's all about. And it is very different from a jail. It reminded me of like a major prison. We've got the barbed wire, the fences, the security. It was pretty intense. So to your point, I think that part makes sense. The next thing I want to talk about too is the defense talking a lot about these charges in Pennsylvania. They reference that the prosecution is mentioning the charges in New York, but we're in Pennsylvania. Why are we talking about New York? What do you think? Do you think that's a tactic as well to say, forget about the second degree murder, let's focus on these charges here in Pennsylvania?
Yeah. Well, maybe that's the intent, but that's not going to happen. In Pennsylvania, prosecutors have already said, hey, this case needs to go back to New York. The homicide charges have to be resolved, and maybe we'll take up these charges after that is done. They arrested him, they took him into custody, they charged him, and they had probable cause to charge him with the fake IDs and the unauthorized weapon, unlicensed weapon. But frankly, that was probably just to ensure that they could continue to hold him here, because this case, and because of the high profile nature of it, this case is going back to New York, and New York is going to try him. And depending on the outcome of that case, we may never even hear of these Pennsylvania charges in the future.
He's going back to New York. It sounds like that's pretty much certain. The question is, when will that happen? What do you think will happen next if we're talking about an upcoming hearing where the prosecution has to prove he's their guy? I mean, what's a timetable for all that?
Well, I think that's important. The important reason why the judge set these specific time limits, because he wants this case to move. He doesn't want it to languish here and there to be continuances and postponements. Hey, if you're going to file writ of habeas corpus, do it in 14 days. The governor, by law, has a responsibility to ask for an extradition warrant within 30 days, have a hearing, make a determination whether in fact he is the guy that they want in New York, which I think we can conclude that that's the case, and then ship him back. So I'm looking, at 30 days, and to get this resolved.
Well, for now, all eyes are on Pennsylvania to see what the next moves are. Matt Mangino, great talking to you as always. Thanks for coming on with us.
Thanks, Sierra. It's always enjoyable to talk with you.
For now, Luigi Mangione will continue to be held at the State Correctional Institution in Huntington, Pennsylvania. He's due back in court, though, on December 30th for a bail hearing. Reporting for Law&Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.